On ASEAN Highlight this week, we take a look back at the 18th ASEAN Summit that was concluded last week amidst unconcluded hot issues that could potentially hamper the association, like the ongoing Thai-Cambodian border dispute and the prospect of Myanmar chairmanship of ASEAN in 2014. While these issues have received enormous coverage by the media, another matter that deserves some attention is the push to make ASEAN a more people-centered community and maintain the organization's relevancy to the world. From the broader perspective, ASEAN as an organization has been reinventing itself in the past few years. Its transformation can be highlighted by the fact that issues previously tabooed by the non-interference principle, like the Thai-Cambodian dispute and the need for democratization in Myanmar, are now openly discussed at the summit by its officials.
Well, I think this is a turning point of ASEAN. These kind of issues used to be extremely sensitive and out of bound, that you would not discuss, you would not raise the issues internal to a member state or bilateral to any two member states. But things seem to be developing very well. They are willing to discuss, willing to listen, and willing to exchange ideas on these things. That, I think, is maturity of ASEAN.
While this may highlight some progress made at the government level, the region's civil society groups still urge more involvement and participation within the ASEAN framework.
What they need to do is they need to revise the way that they accredit NGOs. Make it broad, make it progressive and open, encourage NGOs to register and encourage them to participate in ASEAN. Give them space, give them a chair in the room. So far, it's still old ASEAN, and old ASEAN means close the door, we're meeting inside, we'll tell you about it later, maybe. And that's not acceptable anymore. That's the sort of thing that the ASEAN civil society groups won't accept. The expectations have been raised, the rhetoric has come out about participation in people's voices, and it's not possible now to just go back to the old ways.
This is one of the issues that ASEAN will need to improve upon, and Dr. Surin Pitsuwan, the Secretary-General of ASEAN, admitted that the space made so far in the involvement of civil society in ASEAN is limited. Nevertheless, he sees the association as an evolving entity and a work in progress.
A member to come in. So we are opening up more and more, and you see civil society come more often, although the space may be limited, but it is being open, and I think you see that as a trend rather than see it as a work in progress, rather than as an absolute situation that this is the way it is going to be, no more flexibility, no more space, no more opening. That's not true. Everything is evolving, and it depends on the dynamics between the stakeholders and governments of ASEAN, officials of ASEAN, and the Secretariat. We are working in order to open up that space more and more for the stakeholders in all areas, in all communities, political and security, economic and socio-cultural. Come in and make a contribution, play your role.
Observers noted how ASEAN is changing its ways, but it remains to be seen whether the pace of such transformation is sufficient for regional integration and community building as targeted by the 10 ASEAN member countries.
This is the perennial drawback and challenge of ASEAN, trying to remain relevant to the outside world and trying to remain workable within the region among members. So the question is it making enough progress to remain relevant? The fact that these questions and issues that are contentious are being broached and discussed in the open is a progress, because in the past this would have been behind closed doors, it would have been over a golf course outing, but now these issues are being discussed, and I think if they're accelerated, egged on, pressured by civil society groups, for example, then ASEAN could make much more progress than the members themselves could have imagined and anticipated long ago when they all joined to form ASEAN. So it's a matter of keeping up the pace and acceleration in order to resolve conflicts, promote cooperation, to remain relevant to the outside world.
ASEAN community, for all its progress and shortcomings, are still very much a work in progress, and as the world is quickly evolving to meet the challenges of the 21st century, it is up to ASEAN governments and all other relevant stakeholders in Southeast Asia to make the region work together better in the future. I'm Wongcha-um of Thai News Agency, reporting for ASEAN TV. Up next, we have an exclusive interview with the Deputy Secretary-General of ASEAN, Mr. S. Pushpanathan, at the ASEAN Summit, who spoke to us about ASEAN connectivity and other economic aspects of the association as the region is moving towards the formation of an economic community, or AEC 2015. It has been 6 months so far since the last summit in Hanoi, where the ASEAN Master Plan on Connectivity was agreed upon. What has been the progress so far?
Look at the implementation of the master plan. Now, if you look at the master plan, there are 15 projects we have prioritized. They are covering 3 aspects, physical, institutional and people to people. So the main aim of this particular committee now will be to look at how to implement this project. This will involve coming up with project proposals which are bankable and then looking at financial resources to implement those projects.
To attract this kind of investment, does it mean that there's going to be a public and private partnership or the PPP model?
Looking at this, I would say we have a more comprehensive strategy, looking at working with our dialogue partners for funding of some of those projects. I think more on the software kind of projects, looking at institutional connectivity like trade facilitation, transport facilitation. But more on the hardware, we will be looking at, as you mentioned, PPP model. Public-private models, partnership models, where we will be looking at through the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund and other sources to put some kind of seed funding and then to attract private capital into that. Now, for us to attract private capital, it's important that the projects are attractive. That means the returns, the investments, returns to those investments must be good, so the private sector will put in the resources. And also for government, you have to make sure it's a high-grade investment so that they can use their reserves too. Yeah, so I think we need to really look at those aspects of projects.
Now onto logistics. You mentioned that the people in this region spend almost $2.25 billion a year on logistical costs, and then 55% of those are on terminal costs, transportation costs, access costs. And how realistic are we in achieving the so-called ASEAN single window in the near future?
No, the ASEAN single window, the first step is to look at establishing each country's national single window. Now 6 countries have already established their national single window, and we are now putting through pilot testing for some of these national single windows to see how a regional platform, IT platform will work. Yeah, then we can make those modifications. Then this particular platform is important because it cuts a lot of time in terms of documentation, so everything will be digital and will be easier and more harmonized in a sense. So I think the ASEAN single window is a way to go because it cuts time, it cuts the documentation process, and it provides certainty, transparency for businesses. And this is something that we want to implement as soon as possible, but I think for ASEAN 6 countries, it's not a problem. We can implement probably in another 1-2 years. But for the whole of ASEAN, probably it will take about 2015. So by the time the ASEAN Economic Community is established, we should have the ASEAN single window operating.
Now can we talk a little bit about developmental gap? How realistic are we before 2015 in bridging this gap and even beyond that between the more developed country and a less developed country in this region?
Now, I think this is one of the key decisions that leaders are taking this year because at this particular summit, because without narrowing the development gap, we will not be able to achieve our economic community or even our own ASEAN community as a whole. So this is going to be a focus for us. Now, this will involve, I think, several aspects. One will be the capacity building for ASEAN countries. Second will be the connectivity part. How do we connect the less developed countries and less developed, not only less developed countries, but also the less developed regions, sub-regions, so that ASEAN integration or the benefits of ASEAN community is felt by everyone, all corners of ASEAN. So that is our important goal actually.
ASEAN Infrastructure Fund, can you please elaborate on this issue?
Now the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund, I would say, is very unique because this is the first time we are developing a mechanism or model where there's hybrid capital involved. That means the government will put their reserves, some of their reserves, into this ASEAN Infrastructure Fund, and then after the third year, we will also bring in the private capital. So initially, the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund will be used to fund sovereign projects, government projects, and then in the third year onwards, there will be issuance of bonds and so on to attract the private capital into this fund. But as I mentioned, it's very important to ensure that whatever projects are implemented are bankable, highly attractive projects, because otherwise the private sector will not put in the resources, and there must be, I think, also good returns, and the region must be stable. That means to say that if I am putting my own money from the private side, there should be all these factors taken into account so that you will see the private sector starting to invest. And I would say that in the region there's a lot of liquidity, and this is something I think will work provided we meet those conditions, for the private sector to invest.
On the topic of connectivity, another area that we can talk about is tourism. Is there a Schengen sort of visa in the pipeline for the ASEAN region?
We don't have a Schengen visa, but what we have is bilateral arrangements where countries have signed bilaterally with each other, providing tourist visa for 21 days. So any ASEAN citizen, if he's traveling within ASEAN, can easily get a visa-free travel for 21 days. But we need to go the next step. In fact, the ASEAN leaders are also talking about some form of business card for businessmen. APEC, we have some business card, but I think ASEAN may also have to look at that. So this will facilitate our businessmen, but at the same time, I think tourism is also important because 45% of all tourist arrivals into ASEAN is from ASEAN. So we need to grow that part because I think that is one area that we can really grow.
So now at this 18th ASEAN Summit in Indonesia, looking back at all the progress that's made so far, how ready are we for the AEC 2015?
I think we are very much ready for the AEC. If you look at the last two ASEAN Economic Community scorecard, we have progressed very well. But there are some pending issues that leaders have also highlighted that all member states have to implement in a timely manner. So some of those pending issues. And we are now I would say we are now preparing ourselves for the final sprint, which is by 2015 we will establish the ASEAN Economic Community. But we need to really look at this part, make sure that we don't fall back. That means try to implement everything on time and move forward. And we need to accelerate the pace of integration. So I think several things at this preparatory part of going for the sprint is going to be very important. And the Secretariat is working closely with the member states to make sure that nobody falls back. Everybody is going forward together. Because for us to establish the economic community, we have to all go forward and make sure all go forward with it.
On Monday this week, Thai Prime Minister Apisit Wongcha-um called for the dissolution of the House of Parliament, paving way for the early polls. More in this report from Thai News Agency team.
Considering all the related factors, there was no reason for Prime Minister Apisit to change his intention of the early May dissolution. The Premier finally pulled the curtains himself after seeking the Electoral Commission on March 11 this year. They believed it was now the right time to move on, given the successful passage of all election-related organic laws amid easing political turmoil. Besides, shoring up the rubble of unstable democracy, the Apisit government had shouldered the global recession for 2 years since taking office from then Prime Minister Wongcha-um, whose political life was cut short by the Constitutional Court. Barely surviving the first 3 months, the Democrat-led coalition also met strong public opposition, including the uproar of the red-clad United Front for Democracy against dictatorship. Under his lead, the government had stood firm, however. House dissolution is possible only during a recovering economy, political stability, and fulfilled charter amendments. But what finally led to the disbandment in the first week of May was the passage of amended charters governing elections and documents needing parliamentary consent, effective on March the 5th this year. Apisit insisted under his premiership it was the only way to move the nation forward. Under Article 108 of the Thai Constitution, The king is privileged to authorize a house dissolution, which calls for statewide elections 45 days after a cabinet suspension, but not exceeding 60 days. Thai news agency reporting for ASEAN TV.
We wrap up this edition of ASEAN Highlight by reflecting on the Singapore's general election, which was held last week. It has been a week since the general election was held in Singapore, and for many onlookers unfamiliar with the city-state's politics, the election results hardly represents a major shift to Singapore's political order. The ruling People's Action Party, or PAP, won 81 parliamentary seats out of 87, giving another mandate to Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and his colleagues.
The PAP will analyse the results of the elections, learn from what has emerged in this general election, put right what is wrong, improve what can be made better, and also improve ourselves to serve Singaporeans better.
At this election, the PAP managed to win 60.14% of the overall popular vote, down from 66.6% in 2006 and 75% in 2001, despite all of its institutional advantages. What was more alarming for the PAP was that many of its victories in some constituencies were only marginal. In some cases, the Singapore ruling party won by a mere 100-odd votes. The Opposition Workers' Party, which gained 6 seats in Parliament, won a multi-member constituencies in Aljunied area, unseating 2 cabinet ministers, including George Yeo, the former foreign minister. While pundits and observers all points out to a PAP landslide victory, which the ruling party achieved, the May 7 election can also be seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and co. In this sense, the Singaporean voters sent a stronger signal yet since the PAP established a hegemonic rule over Singapore's political landscape since 1963. Reportedly, the Singaporean electorates were becoming frustrated by what they perceive as the lack of government responsibility over a number of issues, ranging from the rise of cost of living to pay hike of cabinet ministers through to the importation of foreign talents in the city-state workforce, among other things. Some experts point out that the May 7 election marked the emergence of a two- or multi-party system for the Lion city-state, but only history will tell if this is the case. That's it for this edition of ASEAN Highlight. On behalf of the Thai news agency's ASEAN News Desk, I hope you all have a lovely weekend and Sawasdee krap.